following days, the video clips captured by guests circulated on internet, but many dismissed them as an elaborate hoax or a scene from an unreleased Nollywood movie. Those who were there, however, knew the truth of what they had witnessed, and the tale of the groom who turned into a goat on his wedding day would become something of an urban legend. For Maduka's immediate family and close friends, there was no time to concern themselves with gossip or explanation. Their focus was singular: how to break whatever curse or curse had transformed him. The first night after the failed wedding, they hid Maduka, still a goat, in the boys' quarter of his home in Lagos. His distraught mother insisted on staying with him, draping him with a blanket and holding him as much as the animal form would allow, praying fervently over him with psalms and songs through the night. His father, more pragmatic, made phone calls to a few trusted relatives about finding a powerful man of God or a traditional healer who could help. By morning, Maduka remained a goat with no change. He hadn't eaten anything. Even when a relative left a bowl of water and some vegetables out, he recoiled, unwilling to accept the existence. He spent the night coiled up, eyes open and haunted. If goats could cry, he cried silently. On the second day, a well-known pastor was brought in. The man prayed loudly, nearly shouting in the small room, anointing the goat's forehead with oil and commanding the demonic spirit to release the young man. Nothing happened except the goat sneezed at the tickle of oil on its fur, and Maduka let out a groan like bleat that sounded airy like a sob. The pastor left, defeated, advising them to seek other solutions, perhaps even to confess any hidden sins that might have given the devil a hold. It was Auntie Gladys who remembered something, or rather someone, on the night of the second day, as they sat exhausted in the living room. She spoke up. When Onome died, she began quietly. Maduka's mother looked up sharply. Onome, the girl from Benin you introduced to Maduka. It had been years, but she recalled the name and how fondly Auntie Gladys used to speak of that nice Okoje girl her nephew dated long ago. They had never understood why the relationship suddenly ended. Maduka had been vague about it. And then he went abroad. Auntie Gladys nodded, looking pained. She had carried guilt all these years for having had a hand in bringing Onome and Maduka together. After discovering what Maduka did, she had tried to intervene, but it was too late. Yes, after Maduka disappeared abroad, I found out. Onome got into trouble. She was pregnant, and her voice hitched. And she tried to take care of it quietly. It went wrong. She didn't make it. There were gasps of horror and dismay from the family members present. Maduka's mother covered her mouth in shock, tears springing anew. Oh, that poor child. And her poor parents, she whispered. Auntie Gladys continued, voice trembling. At the hospital before she passed, she cursed him. I heard about it from one of her friends who was there. At the time, I almost didn't believe it, or I didn't want to. I prayed it wasn't true, but now. She gestured weakly towards the quarter where the goat lay. Now I think we all know it's real. This is her curse come to pass. Onome said that on his wedding day, he would turn into a goat and be abandoned, and that he would not find peace or happiness until what? Maduka's father asked hoarsely, though he dreaded the answer. Until he makes peace with her spirit, ask her for forgiveness. Auntie Gladys finished. A heavy silence descended. It made an awful kind of sense. Among them all, only Maduka's father struggled to accept it outright. He was a man who dealt in tangible, the business world, not the supernatural. But even he had no alternative explanation. So what do we do now? Maduka's mother said in a hushed tone, her face drawn with sorrow. How do we even begin to make peace with a spirit? Auntie Gladys folded and unfolded her hands. I think we need guidance, perhaps a seer, a diviner who experienced in matters of spirits and curses. They can tell us how to appease her. Tunde spoke up from a corner, his voice shaking slightly. I know someone, or rather, I've heard someone in Benin, a seer who is helped with things like this. People say he can communicate with the dead and break curses. Benin. Maduka's father muted. That's where Onome was from, right? Yes, Auntie Gladys confirmed softly. We will have to go there, and we must go to her family too. They deserve an apology at the very least. And perhaps their blessing in trying to lay her spirit to rest. It was decided. Early the next morning, under the cover of a pre-dawn darkness to avoid curious eyes, they would embark on the journey to Benin City, goat and all, in search of the seer and to face the ghost of the past that had finally caught up with Maduka. The journey to Benin City was made in somber silence. In the pre-dawn gloom, Tunde's SUV carried Maduka's immediate family, Auntie Gladys and the goat that was Maduka, huddled quietly in a boxy enclosure they had fashioned for some privacy. The roads were mostly empty, and the few stops they made for fuel or necessities were quick, avoiding prying eyes. By noon, they had crossed into Edo State and approached the outskirts of Benin City, where old memories lay waiting. Under Auntie Gladys's guidance and Tunde's remembered directions, they navigated the modest home of a local seer known simply as Osahon. He was said to be a man who walked between the worlds of the living and the dead, a last resort for those seeking to undo curses or communicate with spirits. Osahon's home was at the edge of the city, down a dusty road that led towards a small village. It was a humble bungalow painted in fading white, with symbols drawn in chalks on the walls. Cowrie shells and feathers hung from the eaves, and the air was thick with the scent of herbs and something otherworldly. A massive obono tree shaded the compound, its roots gnawed like ancient fingers gripping the earth. As the car pulled up, a lean dark-skinned man in a simple wrapper and faded shirt emerged from the house, as if expecting them. He had a grey beard and intense eyes that belied his otherwise unassuming appearance. This was Osahon. Wordlessly, he beckoned them to bring the afflicted one inside. Maduka's father and Tunde carefully carried the goat out of the car. Maduka's heart pounded as he approached the seer. Goat's body quivered, sensing that this meeting would reveal his fate. They brought him into a sparsely furnished parlor that smelled of incense and age. In one corner, small wooden statues of various deities and framed photographs of ancestors lined a shelf. Along bottles filled with colorful liquids. Osahon pointed to a mat on the floor. They set the goat down gently upon it. Maduka's mother and Auntie Gladys sat on a bench, while his father and Tunde stood anxiously to the side. The road felt heavy with anticipation and a dread. The seer knelt before the goat and looked into its eyes for a long moment. Maduka felt an odd sensation, as if those piercing eyes were looking beyond the surface, seeing the man trapped within. The goat instinctively tried to lower its head in submission or respect. Osahon began to hum under his breath, a low melodic sound that filled the air like distant chanting. He closed his eyes and reached out, placing a hand on the goat's forehead and another on its back. Maduka felt a warmth emanating from the seer's palms, and the humming resonated through his very bones. The others watched in hushed silence. Maduka's mother clutched her rosary, lips moving in prayer as she respected the seer's domain. After several minutes, Osahon opened his eyes and removed his hands. He stood and went to a corner of the room where a clay pot of smoldering herbs sat. He sprinkled something into it, causing a fragrant smoke to rise. The seer then spoke, his voice deep and calm, with a slight echo as if another force spoke through him. This is no ordinary affliction. A curse of the forsaken lies upon this man, Osahon intoned. Maduka's father stepped forward, bowing his head respectfully. Baba, meaning father, we have feared as much. Please, we need to know how to break it. The curse, Who has done this to him? Osaho's eyes seemed to cloud, and he looked as if he were seeing something far away. I see a young woman in great anguish, a spirit restless in death. She speaks of betrayal and heartbreak. All these words, Auntie Gladys let out a quiet sob. Maduka's mother put a hand over her mouth as the truth they suspected was confirmed. The seer continued, voice rhythmic as if reciting a message only he could hear. She loved him, and he repaid that love with deceit. He took from her her dignity, her hope, her very life. In her final moments, she called upon powers beyond, and her cry was heard. The curse was laid, set to strike on the day he sought to claim a happiness that he denied her, his wedding day. Each word felt like a stone in the silence of the room. Maduka lowered his goat head to the floor, body trembling, hearing it spoken out loud. The enormity of what he had done and its consequences crushed him with guilt. If gods could weep, he would have soaked the mat with tears. Osaho's eyes cleared and he looked directly at Auntie Gladys. You woman, you knew this spirit. You called her name in your heart when you arrived. Auntie Gladys nodded tearfully. Onome? Her name is Onome, she whispered. She was like a daughter to me. And my nephew wronged her terribly. The seer nodded gravely. Onome, yes, her spirit is here, even now, not at rest. He turned to face the goat again, in a louder voice, addressing the air as much as those present. He declared, there can be no rest when a soul departs in such pain and anger. She bound him with her curse, so that he would feel every bit of the loneliness and humiliation she felt. Maduka's mother sobbed quietly, covering her face. His father's shoulders sagged as he closed his eyes in regret and shame, likely recalling how proud he was of his son's success, never knowing it was built on cruelty. Tunde interjected softly, Baba, is there a way to save him? To lift this curse? Please, we will do anything required. Osahon held up a hand. These matters are delicate. A curse this strong, cast with a dying breath, is not easily undone. It demands not just ritual, but atonement. He walked to a shelf and took down a small calabash bowl. Inside were 16 shiny cowrie shells. He returned to the mat and cast the shells before the goat, watching how they fell. The others held their breath as he studied the pattern, lips moving silently as he interpreted the signs. Finally he spoke, turning to the family. The spirit says, the living must right the wrong for the dead to find peace. He, the seer, pointed at the goat, indicating Maduka, must confront what he has done. First, he must seek forgiveness from those still living whom he wronged, the family of the girl. Chief Okoje, Auntie Gladys murmured, her father, her mother. Osahon inclined his head. Yes, their cross is not what changed him, but their forgiveness is necessary to suit the spirits for you. Only through their forgiveness can the path to the spirits open. Maduka's father stepped forward. We will go to them immediately. We will beg on our knees if we must, whatever it takes. The seer held his hand up again to indicate he had more to say. After that, the man must go to the final resting place of the girl. There, at her grave, he must keep a vigil, not one night, but 3 nights, alone with her spirit, if he hopes to earn her forgiveness. At this, even the ever-stoic Maduka's father drew a quick breath. The idea of his son, even if currently a goat, sleeping in a graveyard for 3 nights, awaiting an angry ghost, was terrifying. Osahon looked at the goat sympathetically now. He must humble himself completely, show true remorse. The spirit will not be easily appeased. She suffered greatly, but if his regret is sincere and if the family above forgives, then on the third night she may appear to him. Only with her forgiveness will the curse break. If he fails, he will remain as he is and live out his days in loneliness. A strangled bleat came from Maduka, a sound of despair mixed with acceptance. The family members exchanged worried glances but nodded. This was the path laid out. Maduka's mother wiped her eyes and asked the seer in a trembling voice, "Baba, can he ever be himself again before completing all this? Is there no prayer or potion to turn him back, even temporarily?" Osahon gave a small shake of the head. "The curse's terms are set. I cannot undo it with a snap of fingers. At most, I can help ease communication." He reached into a pouch at his waist and sprinkled a fine white powder in a circle around the mat where the goat lay. He then took a palm frond and dipped it in a bowl of water and herbs, flicking it gently over the goat's body while chanting softly in Bini language. The effect was subtle but immediate. Maduka felt a clarity in his goat mind, as though a forge he hadn't realized was there had lifted slightly. Osoho then spoke directly to him, looking into his goat eyes. "Maduka," he called. Startled to hear his own name from the seer's mouth, Maduka instinctively responded, "Yes," but only a bleat sounded. However, Osaho smiled kindly. "I heard the man in your cry, not the animal. Nod your head if you understand me." Maduka the goat nodded vigorously. Auntie Gladys and the others watched in amazement as the seer apparently conversed with the transformed groom. "You carry great guilt," Osaho said gently, as if talking to a normal human. "The weight of it is very heavy on your soul, but guilt alone is not redemption. You must act now to heal what you broke." The goat hung its head and then nodded once more, slower, an affirmation. Osaho stood up, turning to the family. "You understand what must be done. I suggest you proceed at once. Time is of the essence. The sooner the better, to show respect to the dead. The spirit has waited years for this moment. Do not delay further." Maduka's father and mother rose and bowed to the seer. "We cannot thank you enough for your guidance," his father said, opening a cloth bag to offer the payment they had prepared. A few crisp naira notes and traditional gifts of gin and kola nuts. Osaho waved his hand. "Set it there." He indicated a side table, not inspecting it. His demeanor remained detached, focused more on the spiritual task than material reward. "One more thing," he added. "When you go to the family, go with humility. Do not hide the truth. They deserve to know all that had happened, if they don't already. And if you must tell them about the curse and what you seek to do, if they are willing, let the father or whoever the family elder is give his blessing for the vigil. It will carry weight in the spirit realm. If the family remains hostile, the spirit's anger may not abate. So plead for their forgiveness with sincerity." "Yes, we will," Auntie Gladys assured. The seer walked them out to their car. As they were about to depart, he placed a hand on the goat's head one final time and whispered something no one else could hear. A Bini prayer for protection perhaps. Then he tapped the car and signaled them to go. The group felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve. They had a clear admission now: to face Onome's family, seek forgiveness, and then face Onome's spirit itself. Driving back into the city proper, Auntie Gladys directed them toward the Okoje's residence. Every turn and landmark brought back memories for her. The store where she and her friend Onome's aunt used to buy fresh bread, the street where Onome's school was, the church Okoje attended. It was all heartbreakingly familiar and yet tainted by what had happened. Within an hour, they arrived at a gated house in a middle-class neighborhood. It was not as grand as the GRA home they had once visited. The Okojes had moved sometime after Onome's death, possibly downsizing after losing their child, or to escape painful memories. A plague by the gate still read Okoje. Auntie Gladys stepped out first, smoothing her dress, and approached the gatekeeper, introducing herself and asking if Chief Okoje was home. The man gave her a curious look, but recognizing sincerity and seeing the entourage in the car, he went inside to announce to them. Moments later, Chief Okoje himself came out to the gate. Time had aged him beyond his years. His once straight, strong shoulders were a bit stooped. His hair, mostly grey now, framed a face that bore permanent lines of sorrow. When he saw Auntie Gladys, recognition sparked, followed by weariness. "Gladys," he said in a guarded tone, "it's been a long time." She greeted him with a deep breath. "Yes, Chief, it has. I wish it were under happier circumstances." His eyes flickered to the car, where he could make out figures. Strangers to him, perhaps. "Who have you brought? And why?" Auntie Gladys swallowed, glancing back at the car, where Maduka's father and mother now emerged, the goat hidden from the view behind the car door. "I beg you, sir, please, allow us to come in and speak. It concerns Onome." At the mention of his daughter's name, a flash of pain crossed Chief Okoje's face, but it quickly hardened into stern control. "My daughter's memory brings you now, after so many years," he said with a tinge of bitterness. "What is left to be said?" "Please, Chief," she pleaded softly, tears brimming. "It's about Maduka. And what happened back then? We have come to beg for your forgiveness and your help. There are things you may not know, things we ourselves only discovered fully now." The older man's jaw clenched. He regarded them for a long moment. Finally, perhaps out of a sense of courtesy or curiosity, he nodded curtly. "Come inside." He waved them in and led them to a covered veranda that looked out on a small garden. They sat on a wicker chairs. The chief's wife, Mrs. Okoje, emerged from the house as well, having heard the voices. She was thinner than they remembered, with a distant sadness in her eyes that never quite went away. Auntie Gladys quietly introduced everyone, Maduka's parent and friend Tunde. She hesitated on how to introduce the goat, which Maduka's father now held by a rope lead gently, the animal staying back near the door. It was an unusual sight, but the Okojes hadn't registered it fully yet in the confusion of the moment. After polite but tense greetings, Chief Okoje's gaze sharpened. "You mentioned Maduka. Where is he? Is he here?" He looked around as if expecting the younger man to step forward. Auntie Gladys exchanged a troubled look with Maduka's father. This was it. They had agreed honesty was necessary, no matter how unbelievable it sounded. Maduka's father cleared his throat, falling to his knees suddenly before the Okojes. His wife followed suit, kneeling beside him. This startled the chief and his wife. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked, unsettled. With remorse heavy in his voice, Maduka's father began. "Sir, Ma, we come first to say we are deeply sorry for the grievous pain our son caused your family. We only learned after the fact what happened, and by then he was gone. We lost contact with him until recently. If we could have come sooner, we would have." Mrs. Okoje's eyes welled up. She had often dreamed of having this moment where those responsible might apologize. But now that it was happening, it felt strangely hollow. "Your son destroyed my baby's life," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "We trusted him. She trusted him, and he ruined her." Chief Okoje placed a comforting hand on his wife's shoulder. His face was stony, words of apology after the fact. "They don't bring out Onome back. We laid her to rest, but not a day passes that we don't feel that loss." Maduka's mother wept openly. "We know nothing can bring her back or undo the pain, but please, we beg you to find it in your heart to forgive our son. Even if you cannot forget, he has paid dearly for his sins, more than you can imagine." Chief Okoje frowned at that. "Paid dearly? He vanished abroad with my money, and only now you say he has paid. What has he suffered compared to my daughter?" There was anger flaring now, righteous and long contained. Tunde, who remained standing, gently touched on the rope to guide the goat forward into Okoje's view. Sir, this is going to sound unbelievable, but please, look. The Okojes turned their attention to the goat that stepped hesitantly into the veranda's shade. At first, they looked perplexed. It was an ordinary goat by all appearances, save perhaps for the strangely soulful look in its eyes. Why have you brought a goat here? Chief Okoje asked, confused and slightly irritated. Auntie Gladys wiped her tears. That goat is Maduka. There was a bit of silence. Then Mrs. Okoje shook her head, thinking she misheard. I beg your pardon? Maduka's father raised his hands. It is true. On his wedding day, just a few days ago, a curse that Onome placed on him came to pass. Right at the altar, he turned into this goat. The humiliation and despair in his voice were evident. The Okojes looked at each other and then at their visitors, wondering if this was some kind of twisted joke. Seeing their skepticism, Auntie Gladys rushed to explain the whole story from the beginning. How Maduka deceived Onome, how she died. The Okojes of course knew that, but listened solemnly to the details they might not have heard. Like her last moment and curse, and how now on his wedding day, indeed he became a goat, fulfilling her dying words. She recounted their desperate search for help and the seer's instructions. As the story unfolded, the chief and his wife went from disbelief to shock. By the end, Mrs. Okoje was covering her mouth in horror at the supernatural vengeance that had played out. Chief Okoje, who prided himself on rationality, was pale and speechless. Yet deep down, he did not doubt the power of a dying person's curse. He had heard of such things in folklore, though never imagined witnessing it. To show you we speak the truth, Auntie Gladys said softly, we can only offer the evidence before you. That goat knows you. He has the mind of Maduka. If you call his name, he will respond. Chief Okoje, as an experiment, narrowed his eyes at the goat. Maduka, he said, not sure what to expect. The goat immediately turned its head toward him and let out a plaintive bleat, limping a step forward and then bowing its front legs as if kneeling. The chief's breath caught. It was airy, as if the animal understood. He tried again, this time with anger creeping in. Maduka, look at what you did to my family. The goat lifted its head and looked directly at him. It made a sound, halfway between a bleat and a cry, and hung its head low, pressing its face to the ground near the chief's shoes. The gesture of remorse was unmistakable. Mrs. Okoje burst into tears suddenly. It is true. Oh heavens, it is true. She clung to her husband's arms. The curse is real. Our daughter's spirit did this. For Chief Okoje, a swell of emotions raged inside. Part of him felt a grim satisfaction. Justice, however fantastical, had been served. The man who wronged his daughter was brought low, made into a beast. But another part of him, the part that was fundamentally a decent and compassionate man, felt pity and sorrow. He had not wanted such a horrific fate for anyone, even the one who caused him grief. And seeing the remorseful creature before him, he thought of his own teachings in church about forgiveness. He took a deep shuddering breath. What is it you want from us now? He asked quietly, sinking into a chair as if the weight of everything made it hard to stand. Maduka's father, still on his knees, said, the seer said his curse cannot be broken unless the spirit forgives. And before that, the family forgives. We need your forgiveness, sir, ma, so that Onome's spirit can also forgive him and find peace. And he must visit her grave for 3 nights to ask for forgiveness directly. Mrs. Okoje's eyes widened with concern, thinking of a goat at her daughter's grave. Her grave, it's in our town, about an hour from here, where we buried her by her grandmother. Oh, there, she looked at her husband. The thought of disturbing their daughter's resting place made her tremble. Chief Okoje stood and moved towards the goat. With tentative movement, he placed a hand on the goat's head as one might pat the shoulder of a fallen man. "Maduka," he said, his voice thick. "I never imagined I would see you like this. What you did to my Onome, to us, it destroyed us. I wanted to hate you forever. I cursed your name myself many nights, though I never imagined such a curse coming to life." His voice cracked, but he continued, "You took my daughter's future and in turn lost your own humanity. A terrible price. A terrible price." The goat raised its head, eyes glistening with what looked like tears. It nuzzled against the chief's hand, as if wordlessly begging. Chief Okoje inhaled sharply, steadying himself. "But if my daughter's spirit will only rest when I forgive you, then who am I to refuse? I am a broken father, but I will not be an inhuman one." He motioned for his wife to join him. Together, they knelt down, facing the kneeling goat and the other family members still on the floor. In a voice filled with sorrow and solemnity, he declared, "Before God, we forgive you, Maduka. I forgive you for what you did to my daughter. As much as it hurt, I pray that her spirit will find peace and that you too will learn the true meaning of remorse and change your ways." Mrs. Okoje's tears flowing freely nodded. "We forgive you," she echoed softly. "For Onome's sake, we forgive you." Maduka's mother and father cried in relief, bowing their heads to the ground in gratitude. Auntie Gladys whispered a fervent "Thank you, Jesus," and Tunde wiped his tears. The goat that was Maduka let out a long, mournful bleat that slowly turned into a gentler sound, almost like a sigh. He pressed his head to the ground, front legs stretched out, a posture of complete submission and gratitude. A faint breeze rustled through the garden at that moment, though the afternoon was still, perhaps, one might say, a passing acknowledgement from an unseen guest. Chief Okoje slowly rose, helping his wife up. There was a silence as everyone collected themselves. Finally, he spoke, wary but determined. "I will take you to her grave. We will all go. If this is what must be done to lay our dear Onome to rest at last and free this man from this entanglement of fate, then so be it." He turned to his wife. "Go and fetch the keys and bring a wrapper or blanket. We might need it for him, for the night." She nodded and went inside. Within an hour, they set out in a convoy of 2 cars, the Okoje's and Tunde's SUV, towards the village where Onome was buried. The sun was beginning to dip westward, casting golden light on the palm trees lining the highway. The road took them from city to countryside, and as the scenery turned to lush greenery and farmlands, Maduka's heart pounded with both fear and hope. He was about to confront the one person he feared facing the most, the woman he had wronged in life, now a restless spirit. Forgiveness had been granted by the living. Now he had to earn it from the dead. They reached the small village of Evbuoma, where Onome had been laid to rest, just as the sun was sinking low on the horizon. The sky painted in hues of orange and purple, and the evening air was thick with the scent of soil and grass. It was a peaceful place, the kind where twilight brought a chorus of crickets and fireflies began to twinkle among the trees. Chief Okoje guided the cars through a narrow dirt path that led to the village cemetery, a modest field bordered by palm and mango trees. A few grazing cows lifted their heads lazily as the vehicle approached, then went back to their evening feed. The cemetery itself was simple, rows of graves marked by wooden crosses or cement headstones, some adorned with wilted wreaths or candles melted to stub. In one corner stood a large frangipani tree, its white flowers giving off a sweet, heavy fragrance. They parked just outside the cemetery fence. As everyone stepped out, a hush fell over them. The Okojes led the way down a footpath, with Maduka's family following, and the goat Maduka, walking between Tunde and Auntie Gladys on the rope lead, moving of its own accord, almost as if drawn forward. The chief stopped before a particular grave marked by a grey headstone. Inscribed on it was Onome Okoje, beloved daughter, 1998 to 2021. Fresh tears glistened in the father's eyes as he stopped at his daughter's resting place. Mrs. Okoje reached out and touched the headstone gently, whispering, "We are here, Onome. We haven't forgotten you, my child." The other stepped back a respectful distance, allowing Maduka, still in goat form, to be nearest to the grave along with Chief Okoje. The sun dipped below the horizon, and a soft warm dusk enveloped the cemetery. Fireflies flickered in the grass, and in distance, one could hear villagers pounding fufu for the evening meal or calling their children home. It was time to begin the vigil. According to Osaho's instructions, Maduka was to stay by the graveside for 3 nights. From sundown to sunrise, he alone was to directly engage with the spirit. Others could be nearby but not interfere once night fully fell. The seer had also given Auntie Gladys a small guard of blessed oil and some chalky white native chalk, nzu, to mark a protective circle around the grave for Maduka's safety during the night vigil. As twilight faded, Auntie Gladys carefully sprinkled some oil at the head and foot of the grave and around its perimeter, murmuring prayer for mercy and protection. Then she drew a rough circle around the area with the chalk, wide enough to encompass Maduka and the grave. This will keep any wandering spirits or negative forces at bay, she explained softly. Only Onome's spirit may enter this space to meet him. Maduka's mother was quietly weeping again, worried for her son spending the night in a graveyard under a curse. But Maduka's father stood beside her, holding her, silently conveying that this had to be done. Chief Okoje addressed the goat, or rather, the man within the goat. "We will stay not far off, my son. We won't leave you entirely alone out here. If there's anything, or maybe anything goes wrong, we'll be here." He pointed to a cluster of trees about 30 yards away, where they planned to make a small camp with lanterns for the night. The understanding was they should not intervene or cross into the circle unless absolutely necessary, but they could simply leave either. The goat bowed its head in acknowledgement. Maduka felt gratitude. Their presence, even at a distance, was a comfort, but the true test he knew was one he had to face himself. Night fell fully, and with it came a chorus of cicadas and the occasional hoot of an owl. The family retreated to their chosen spot under the trees, where they lit 2 lanterns, casting a gentle glow. They laid out mats. No one expected to sleep much, but they could sit and watch over the grave from there. Maduka was now alone at Onome's grave, within the circle of chalk and oil. The moon, just past half full, provided some silvery light between drifting clouds. He stood on 4 legs, right beside the headstone, his goat eyes reflecting the moonlight area. He wondered how exactly he was supposed to call out to Onome's spirit. Osahon hadn't given a specific incantation, just that his sincere remorse would draw her if she was willing to come. He decided he would speak from his heart, even if it emerged as bleat in the night. Then the first night vigils began. Maduka cleared his throat, an old human habit, which produced a snorting sound. Then he spoke softly, in his mind forming the words, even if they were unintelligibly externally. "Onome," he thought, "I don't know if you can hear me. It's me, Maduka. I'm here. I've come to beg for your forgiveness." All that came out was a wavering bleat. It sounded forlorn, even to his ears. He hoped somehow her spirit could sense the intent, if not the literal words. For a long time, nothing happened. The cemetery was quiet save for the nocturnal insect. The breeze picked up briefly, rustling the frangipani's tree leaves, then died down. Maduka felt a prickle of disappointment. Perhaps she wouldn't come at all tonight. Perhaps she wouldn't come until the third night, testing his resolve. Or perhaps a fearful thought whispered she would never come, and he would remain a beast forever. He decided to speak again, forcing as much meaning as he could into the sound. He talked, or bleated, about the past. He reminded her of the first night they met at Auntie Gladys' veranda, how beautiful and kind she was. He recounted little memories, walking in King Square, the way she laughed at his jokes, the day he met her parent. As he talked, the memory of those innocent days made his heart ache. Through his bleating monologue, tears rolled down from his goat eyes. At the camp under the trees, the listeners could hear the goat making soft noises, sometimes almost like it was crying. It was a pitiful sound that brought tears to their own eyes. Mrs. Okoje quietly held her husband's hand. They both thought of their daughter in those happier times he described. As midnight neared, exhaustion tugged at Maduka. Still, he fought to stay alert, pacing within the circle occasionally to keep his blood flowing. He lay down for a moment by the headstone to rest his head. The earth beneath was firm, but not uncomfortable, warmed slightly by the earlier heat of the day. It was then, as he lay beside Onome's grave, that he heard the first sign. A faint sound, like a distant sob, drifted on the air. The goat's ear perked up. He lifted his head. The sound came again, clearer this time, a woman sobbing. Carried by the wind, it was unmistakable and heart-wrenching. Maduka rose to his feet quickly, heart pounding. "Onome," he tried to say, "is that you?" The sobbing continued, seeming to circle around the graveyard. To the others by the trees, it was audible too. Auntie Gladys gasped and gripped Tunde's arms. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. He nodded, eyes wide. The Okojes looked around nervously. They recognized the voice. It sounded like their daughter, crying as she had in her last days of despair. Suddenly, all the insects and night creature fell silent, as if the entire place were holding its breath. Maduka stood very still, the sobbing turned into a gentle humming, a melody he knew well. It was a song Onome used to hum to herself, a lullaby her mother taught her. He had heard her hum it while cooking or relaxing. Hearing it now sent chills through him. His goat eyes scanned the area. At first, he saw nothing. Then, near the frangipani tree, he noticed a faint light, like a misty white glow. It was subtle, barely there. If he hadn't been looking directly, he might have missed it. The glow hovered and slowly moved, almost like someone pacing. Maduka took a tentative step toward the edge of the circle, but remembered not to leave it. Instead, he tried again to communicate a series of plaintive bleats, gentle, questioning, imploring. The glowing mist drifted closer, but still stayed several yards away from the circle. Near another grave, it flickered, and then, for a brief moment, Maduka thought he could discern a shape, a human outline, before it faded again. The crying stopped. The presence, for he was now sure it was Onome's spirit, lingered for a more minute. Then the glow receded back towards the trees and vanished altogether. The night sound slowly resumed, as if released from a spell. He realized that Onome had indeed come, but she had not approached or spoken. She had only wept, letting him hear her pain. Perhaps that was her message this night. To remind him of her suffering, to make him fully feel the weight of what he had done. If that was her intention, it worked. Maduka felt as though his heart might break under that sorrow. He didn't sleep at all the rest of that first night, replaying the sound of her sobs in his head and whispering apologies to the darkness. By dawn, he was emotionally exhausted. The family came to him as the sky lightened, all of them having heard the weeping woman's voice. They knew she had been there. Maduka's mother approached him first and gently wiped his face with a cloth. murmuring soothing words as one would to a child after a nightmare, though in truth it was hers and her son's shared nightmare. Chivokoje looked at the grave and said softly, "My daughter, we are here. We heard you. Please, find it in your heart to forgive, to move on. There has been enough pain." His voice trembled and he felt silent. They left at full sunrise to get some rest at a nearby family house the Okoje still maintained in the village. They knew they would return before dusk again for the second vigil. The second night found Maduka more anxious than before. If Onome had appeared only to cry and leave, would she come closer tonight? Would she be angry? He was afraid, but determined to endure whatever came. At sunset, he took his place once more by the graveside. The protective circle renewed by Auntie Gladys. The family resumed their watch from afar, wary but resolute. Night creatures began their chorus once more. The moon was higher tonight, casting elongated shadows of the headstones. Maduka cleared his throat and began again to speak to Onome. This time, he focused on apologies. He poured out his remorse, recounting each of his wrongs, how he lied to her, how he stole her parents' money, how he abandoned her in her time of need. Each confession was punctuated by bleats that sounded like wails. He didn't care how pitiful he sounded. He wanted the universe to know he accepted responsibility. At first, there was nothing but his own voice. Then about an hour into the vigil, a sudden breeze picked up, swirling falling leaves in a little whirlwind over Onome's grave. The air grew noticeably cooler, and a faint creaking noise was heard, like a gate swinging in the wind. Though the cemetery gate was still, the watchers under the trees straightened in alertness, lantern lights flickering. Tunde held a flash torch, steady but didn't shine it, not wanting to interfere unless needed. Maduka felt the hairs on his goat's back rise. He sensed she was near even before he saw anything. There, to the left of the headstone, the glow began again. This time it didn't remain a distant mist. The light drew nearer to the circle's edge and slowly, gradually, took on a more distinct form. A figure became visible, Onome's spirit. She appeared as a translucent form, bathed in a soft white luminescence. She looked as she did in life, but with an ethereal, almost sorrowful beauty. She was not wearing the hospital gown or anything from her death. Instead, interestingly, she appeared in the same simple Ankara dress she wore the first night Maduka met her. Perhaps a form her spirit chose deliberately to remind him of what he first fell for, or what he ultimately betrayed. Her face was sad, those gentle features marred by the memory of pain. She stood just outside the chalk circle, as it barred entry for now, or perhaps unwilling to come closer. Her eyes, dark and glistening, fixed upon the goat. Maduka was frozen. A mix of joy and terror flooded him. Joy to see her, to know she was truly there. Terror because he didn't know what she would do, what wrath or anguish she might unleash. Behind him, he heard the faint of gasps of Mrs. Okoje carried on the breeze. They all saw her now, a ghostly figure glowing in the graveyard. Onome's spirit tilted her head, observing the goat. When she spoke, it was not with her physical voice, but indirectly into Maduka's mind. A phenomenon he only understood after a moment. To the onlookers, it seemed she was silent except for the rustling of the air around her. But Maduka heard her clearly inside him. "Maduka," she said, her tone echoing with heartbreak. At the sound of his name spoken by that familiar voice, Maduka instinctively tried to respond. What came out was a strained bleat as he bowed his head, trying to convey deference and remorse. Onome's face hardened slightly. "You cannot speak, can you?" Her voice resonated in his mind alone, fitting. "Now you know the helplessness of having no voice. Like I had when you left me with only silence." He whimpered and shook his head desperately. tears brimming. In his thought, he cried out, "I'm sorry, Onome. I'm so sorry." But he had no way to know if she could hear his thought as he heard hers. Perhaps she sensed it, because her expression wavered. She glided around the circle slowly, never taking her eyes off him. "Do you remember how you promised to be by my side?" she asked. "How you vowed you wouldn't live without me? Those were lies. And yet I believed everyone." Maduka remembered. The goat shouldered under the weight of that memory. He lowered himself to his knees. Front leg bent. The closet a goat could come to a pleading posture. He hoped she understood this body's limitation and saw the sincerity in his gesture. Onome stopped moving, standing directly across the grave from him. Her face was streaked, as if tears had been flowing, though none fell now from those spectral eyes. "I cried for you." Her voice grew softer, full of hurt. "Night after night, I begged God to bring you back, or at least let me understand why you did what you did. Did you ever, even for a moment, consider what might happen to me when you vanished?" Maduka's soul writhed in guilt. He had considered it briefly, then selfishly brushed it aside. Now, confronted with her spirit, he could not lie or hide. He slowly shook his head, a sorrowful moan escaping him. The ghost of Onome closed her eyes as if absorbing this answer. Painful as it was, when she opened them, there was a flash of anger beneath the sorrow. "You took everything from me," she said, voice echoing slightly. "My future, my family's pride, our child." Her voice broke on that word. The wind around the circle gusted into response to her surge of emotion. The frangipani blossoms swelled off the tree and scattered over the graves like pale tears. Maduka dared to lift his head and inch a bit closer within the circle. He wished he could speak human words to beg her forgiveness. But since he could not, he did what was in his power. He inched forward and then bowed low, pressing his face to the ground, right at the border of the circle near her feet. It was an image of utter penitence, the proud Maduka brought literally to the ground. Onome's spirit looked down at the once man who had hurt her so deeply. In that moment, flickers of memory played in her mind, happier times with him, his charming smile, the tenderness she thought they had. Those memories contrasted with the nightmare that followed. The anger and love worried within her spectral form. She reached one translucent hand towards the goat, then hesitated. A protective barrier of the circle shimmered faintly, sensing a spirit at its edge. She could not touch him yet. "Why?" she asked simply, and this time aloud. The watchers heard that single word echoing with heartbreak through the night air. It sounded both like Onome and something otherworldly. Maduka looked up. In that instant, something miraculous happened, perhaps due to the intensity of the moment of the seer's earlier intervention. For just a few seconds, those near around could swear the goat's bleating transformed into an actual word, hoarse and cracking but intelligibly sorry. It startled even Onome's ghost. She drew her hand back slightly, even widening with surprise at hearing a human word from him. Encouraged and desperate, Maduka summoned every ounce of will and tried to speak again. The effort was immense. His goat throat was not made for speech, but his soul pushed to answer her question. In a garbled mix of bleat and word, it sounded like selfish. "I was selfish." The sound carried on the quiet air, reaching even the ears of those at the distance who listened in wonder. Onome's spirit blinked as if holding back tears. She knew it was the truth. His selfishness was the root of all of this. Hearing him admit it, even in that crude, agonized way, softened something in her expression. The anger in her eyes dimmed, leaving mostly sadness. She glided around the circle slowly, still eyeing him, but her posture was less rigid now, more pensive. It was as if she was deliberating, her spirit torn between the lingering desire for vengeance and the innate kindness of her heart. She stopped moving and looked at him intently. In a gentle mental voice only he could hear, she whispered, "Do you regret it, Maduka? Did you ever truly regret what you did to me?" Maduka's head bobbed up and down fervently, tears dropping onto the dust. He managed to grunt out in affirmation. Then he tried to articulate more. He started screaming inside, "I regret it every second now. I wish I could take it back. I wish I had never hurt you." But only a high-pitched whine followed. Yet, perhaps his eyes and pathetic state conveyed what words could not. Onome's ghost surveyed him, and in the silence that followed, the night itself seemed to pause in expectation. Finally, Onome's spirit spoke again, aloud this time for all to hear. Though her voice was soft, "Tomorrow," she said quietly, "I will return once more, one last time, one last night." Maduka realized she was going to make him endure all 3 nights. The curses times were set. She would not forgive him until he had completed the trial fully. He bowed his head in acceptance. Onome's spirit began to fade, the glow diminishing. Before she vanished completely, she turned her gaze towards where her parents and family stood watching. Though she did not speak to them directly, not wanting to break the vigil structure, still, the Okojies felt a warmth pass by them, like a faint embrace of recognition from their daughter's spirit, and both burst into tears quietly, a mix of sorrow and a strange relief just to have seen her again. When she was gone, the light and temperature of the night returned to normal. Maduka remained where he was, shaking but also feeling a small bud of hope. She had not yet forgiven him, but she had listened. She had even asked him questions. That meant some part of her wanted answers. Perhaps closure. He would do anything in his power on the final night to give her peace. The second night ended with Maduka utterly drained. At dawn, Tunde found him collapsed by the graveside, conscious but weak. They helped him drink some water, which was a bit awkward with his goat mouth, but he managed, and led him away to rest during the day. The family spent the day in prayer and quiet reflection. The Okojies in particular felt emotionally raw from seeing and hearing their daughter's ghost. Mrs. Okojie wondered if they had done the right thing, stirring her spirit like this. But Chief Okojie reassured her that it was the only way to free both their child and the young man from this entanglement of fate. Maduka's parents hovered over the goat all day, fanning him, feeding him sliced fruits. When in goat form, one still had to eat something. Fortunately, he found fruit acceptable, though his appetite was small. They encouraged him gently to hold firm for one more night. As twilight of the third and final night approached, a sense of both trepidation and anticipation filled everyone. Maduka took his place at the grave one more time. The chalk circle was refreshed one last time. The oil sprinkled. The moon hid behind thick clouds tonight, making the cemetery darker than before. Only the faint glow of the distant lanterns and the twinkle of stars provided light. From the start of the vigil, there was an electricity in the air, as if the spirit knew this was the conclusion. The usual night sounds were hushed, and an expectant silence reigned. Maduka waited, his heart beating fast. He didn't try to vocalize much this time. He sensed she would come when she was ready. He spent the opening hours in quiet introspection, gazing at the headstone and murmuring broken apologies, more like prayers, under his breath. Near midnight, a sudden mist rolled into the cemetery, unlike the clear night before. Fog now gathered in walls, low to the ground. It enveloped the tombstones in a gauzy veil. Within the mist, a familiar glow appeared, moving steadily towards him. Onome's spirit emerged from the forge just at the edge of the circle. This time, she did not hesitate. With a sound like a soft sigh, she stepped over the chalk line and into the circle. The protective barrier accepted her. After all, she was the one they sought, not a malevolent force. Her figure, though still translucent, appeared more solid now that she was in the circle. She stood an arm's length from Maduka. Up close, Maduka could see the sadness in her eyes more clearly and the faint outline of the dimple on her left cheek that deepened when she used to smile. It hit him with a pang how alive she still seemed in form, yet unreachable, and how terribly he missed that chance to ever see her truly alive again. He sank down slowly, exhausted and humbled, folding his front legs so he was lying down before her. Neck bent low in a posture of supplication. Onome gazed down at the creature that was once the man she loved. She had spent years lingering in bitterness and sorrows, tied to this world by unresolved pain. Now here he was, at her grave, paying the price and seeking to right the wrong. For a long moment, neither moved nor spoke. The world around them felt suspended. At length, Onome's spirit knelt and reached out her hand. This time, she touched him. Her ghostly figures passed gently over the goat's head. And unlike a normal touch, which would have simply gone through, this had a tangible effect. Maduka felt a comfortable coolness where she touched him, and a tingling that was strangely warm. In that touch was years of emotion, anger, hurt, and longing all mingled. Maduka closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his fore. "Maduka," she whispered, and to the watchers, it looked as though the ghost was simply silently petting the goat. But Maduka heard her voice continue in his mind. "The pain you caused me, it ran so deep." His eyes remained shut, and he nodded faintly under her hand. "I know," he thought. "I feel it now. I'll do anything to undo it." She seemed to hear the essence of his thought, for she answered, "I know you would, but we cannot change the past, only learn from it." Her tone was no longer accusatory. It was very, infinitely sad but soft. "My life ended because of what you did," she continued, a quiver in her ethereal voice. "I cursed you in my final breath because I wanted you to feel what I felt, and you have." She lifted her hand and gestured lightly at his goat form, perhaps even more. Maduka opened his eyes and looked at her. In them, she saw genuine remorse and self-loathing for what he had done, and gratitude that she was even giving him his chance. She gave a small sad smile, like a candle flicker, bright for an instant. "Our baby, did you ever think of the child that could have been?" This thought had tormented Maduka often these past days since he learned of the pregnancy's tragic end. He whimpered, shaking his head slowly, then nodding. He didn't think of it then, but he had thought of it now endlessly. Onome's expression told him she understood. He had not considered it then, but he regretted it now. From under the tree, someone, perhaps Efe, who had quietly joined them this night, or maybe one of the mothers, let out a soft sob hearing that mention of the baby. Onome's spirit closed her eyes as if in prayers. "I have hated you, Maduka," she admitted, voice trembling. "For long in the afterlife, I hated you for what you stole from me. That hatred bound me here as much as this curse bound you." Maduka wished again that he could speak human words. He would have begged her not to hate him, to know his regret, but all he could do was gently push his head against her kneeling form, an imploring nozzle. To his surprise, her form was now solid enough that he felt resistance. It was like pressing into a cool, gentle force. She did not pull away. She looked at him, and as their eyes met, man in beast form and woman in spirit form, an understanding passed. They were two souls who had once been close, now on opposite sides of life and death, both wounded by the same tragedy. Onome slowly leaned forward, and in a gesture reminiscent of their farewells long ago, She placed a ghostly kiss on the goat's forehead. It felt like a breeze, a touch of dew. Maduka felt a surge of emotion. It was forgiveness in tangible form, or at least the promise of it. Finally, Onome spoke the words that would release them both. I forgive you, Maduka. Though softly spoken, they rang in the air, carrying to the listening group under the trees. Mrs. Okojie let out a wail of relief and grief at once, and Maduka's mother clutched her chest, whispering, thank God, in between tears. Onome's spirit continued, as if formally lifting the curse. I release you from the pain I wished upon you. May neither of us remain bound by what happened. As she spoke, the mist around them swelled and a gentle glow expanded from the form. Enveloping Maduka, he felt a warmth flooding through him, more intense than the seer's earlier touch, but comforting, as if a blanket of sunlight had wrapped around his soul. Onome stood, her form beginning to grow brighter and less defined. Her face, however, remained peaceful, and for the first time in the encounter, truly like the Onome he remembered, kind and gentle. Thank you, Maduka tried to say. It came out as a bleat, but perhaps in that mystical moment, she understood, for she gave a small nod. She looked towards where her parents were. Summoning the last of her strength, she made a graceful gesture of farewell, and Chief Okojie and his wife both felt a soft touch like a breeze brushed their cheeks. A daughter's final kiss goodbye. Onome's finger then began to ascend slightly, or maybe it was merely dissolving into the moonlight that broke through a cloud at that precise moment. The glow around her intensified, and for an instant, those watching could not distinguish her form in the brightness. When the light dimmed, the mist was gone, and so was she. The night was left still and clear, stars twinkling kindly down as if in approval. Within the circle, the chalk line smudged by her entrance, the goat that was Maduka remained motionless, bathed in residual light. Then, as all watched with bated breath, another transformation began. Maduka felt it before the others saw it, a tingling in every limb, an unfurling sensation as if invisible hands were reshaping him. One of the lanterns under the tree suddenly flickered and then fled, casting a bright beam onto the circle at that exact time, illuminating the silhouette of the goat. The silhouette started to stretch upward, bones cracked and reformed with a muted crunching sound. The hind legs lengthened, lifting the body. Front legs became arms, held out for balance. Fur receded, horns sank back into a reshaping skull. In moments that seemed to stretch longer than the original curse, the animal contour smoothed into a human figure on hands and knees. Gasps and echoes from the family. Tunde grabbed a lantern and rushed forward despite custom, unable to contain himself. He held it up high, and in its glow they saw it. Maduka the man, kneeling naked on Onome's grave, whole and human once more. Auntie Gladys cried out in joy, and Maduka's mother practically flew forward, weeping, to drape the wrapper they had brought around her son's shoulders. Her father was right behind, helping him sit back, eyes filled with tears of relief. Maduka himself was disoriented for a moment. The world felt so different on two legs, and with human eyes again, he looked down at his hands, and flexed his fingers in disbelief and gratitude. Then his gaze fell upon the gravestone beside him, and reality rushed back. He gently laid a hand on the top of Onome's headstone, fresh tears forming. "Thank you, and I'm sorry," he whispered with a voice now fully his own, though hoarse from days of disuse. He knew she was gone, but he hoped somehow the message would carry. The family encircled him, half laughing, half crying. Chief Okojie stood a step back, holding his wife, who was sobbing tears of both happiness for Maduka and renewed grief over the final farewell to their daughter. There was a silent understanding that Onome's spirit had now departed to peace. Maduka, clutching the wrapper around him, turned to the Okojies and then sank to his knees again, this time as a man, before them, and spoke through his tears. "Sir, Ma, I don't have the words to thank you. I don't deserve what you've done for me, but I will depend every day making amends. I promise you." He looked to his own parents and aunt. "And I'm sorry to all of you for everything." Chief Okoje lifted him up gently. The old animosity had melted into the crucible of this supernatural trial. "Just live a good life, son," he said quietly with a sad smile. "That will be thanks enough. Honor our Onome's memory with how you live." Maduka nodded solemnly, wiping his face. The night was almost spent. The eastern horizon had a faint ribbon of grey, heralding dawn. The curse was broken, and amidst the sorrow of what had transpired, there was a sense of divine grace and closure. They all left the graveyard quietly, with a final prayer over Onome's resting place. In the gentle light of the new dawn, one could see that the grave, which had been unadorned, now had fresh frangipani blossoms scattered all over it, as if placed by loving hands. None of them had done it. It was as if the very trees shed tears of flowers during the night, or maybe a final token from Onome herself. Whatever the case, Onome Okoje could now rest in peace. In the weeks that followed, life slowly reassembled its pieces around the extraordinary event that had transpired. Maduka recovered his physical strength quickly, but the weight of what he had endured and learned marked him forever. He spent several days in Benin City, not rushing back to Lagos or his old routine. Instead, he stayed with Auntie Gladys, who nursed him with hearty meals and plenty of quiet comfort. Word of the Biza wedding day incident had spread, but the true story of the curse and its lifting remained within the small circle of those who witnessed it. To the public, it became one of those unbelievable tales that many dismissed as rumor or superstition. One of Maduka's first acts as a changed man was to personally return the money he had taken. Though Chief Okoje initially refused to accept it, Maduka insisted. He liquidated some of his business assets and added interest to cover the years gone, handing the chief a bank draft that equaled for more than the original sum. It was his way of not only repaying a debt, but also contributing to a scholarship foundation the Okojies decided to set up in Onome's name. Together, they established the Onome Okoje Memorial Fund, aimed at helping young women in difficult circumstances. It was a way to turn their pain into hope for others, and Maduka donated generously, seeing it as a small penance that could never fully balance the scales, but would honor the woman he wronged. Back in Lagos, Maduka sought out Adugo, not to rekindle what was lost. He understood that was impossible, but to apologize sincerely for the trauma she experienced. Facing her and her family was daunting. They had been humiliated and terrified by what happened at the wedding. At first, they did not even want to grant him an audience, but through a mutual friend, Maduka sent a heartfelt letter detailing the truth, including the fact that he had been cursed for past sins and that the curse was now lifted. It was a hard story to believe, but perhaps the strangeness of what they saw made anything seem possible. Eventually, Adugo agreed to meet him in a public place. With deep remorse, Maduka apologized to her, acknowledging how his hidden past had destroyed their day and hurt her deeply. Adugo, though still shaking and hurt, saw the genuine contrition in his eyes. In time, she forgave him for the sake of her own peace. Though their lives would go separate ways, the encounter ended without bitterness, a relief to them both. As the months went by, people noted a profound change in Maduka. The once proud and opportunistic man had become humble and introspective. He often spoke little and listened more. In business, he chose the path of honesty and fairness, even when it was not the easiest path. He began mentoring younger entrepreneurs, emphasizing ethics and integrity over quick profits. When some of his old friends jested about his new softness, saying he used to be more ruthless, he only smiled faintly and said, "I've learned that any success built on hurting others is no success at all." His attitude towards women transformed completely. Where once he might have seen a pretty face or a wealthy background as something to exploit, he now saw individuals with heart and dignity that deserved respect. The memory of Onome's trust in him and how he shattered it remained a guiding caution in all his interactions. He became an advocate for women's empowerment in his community, donating to causes that supported single mothers and speaking out against the very kind of exploitation he once committed. Often, he returned to Evbuoma village, to the quiet cemetery under the frangipani tree. He would lay fresh flowers on Onome's grave and spend some time in reflection or prayer, thanking her spirit for teaching him the greatest lessons of his life and praying she was at peace. Sometimes, he imagined he could feel a gentle breeze or catch the scent of those blossoms in an uncanny way, and he liked to believe it was Onome's presence, gentle and forgiving, watching over him. Maduka's parents, who had feared for both his life and soul, were grateful to have their son back, not just in human form, but transformed at heart. He mended his relationship with them, regretting the years he had neglected his family in pursuit of selfish gains. The family drew closer than ever through the shared ordeal. It took a long time for Maduka to even consider the idea of love or marriage again. He focused on being a better man, letting any thought of personal happiness come second to doing right by others. But life has a way of offering second chances when one truly changes. A few years later, he met a kind-hearted woman through his charity work, a teacher who knew of his past, for he never hid the truth, and accepted him, scars and all. Their courtship was gentle and honest, built on mutual respect. When Maduka eventually stood at the altar once more, it was a simple, low-key ceremony with just family and close friends. This time, there were no curses looming, no secrets hidden, and no shocking transformations. Only the sincere vows of a man who understood their mistakes. The most important lesson in this story is that in this life, no matter how smart or powerful you think you are, you can never truly outrun the cries of those you have wronged, because the tears of the innocent and the curses of the broken-hearted will always follow you until you humble yourself, seek forgiveness, and learn to treat every human being with respect and love. And with that, my dear friends, our story comes to a close. But remember, the magic of storytelling lives on, waiting to whisk us away on new adventures, where the wonders of imagination know no bounds. Goodbye for now, and may your dreams be filled with joy, wonder, and endless possibility. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting stories.